everybody for joining us. My name is Logan Nichols. If we haven't met before, I'm MCI's research director, and you're joining us here for our Lemonade Stand. So this is a series of webinars that we put together to started out in the middle of COVID, a way to bring the community together and talk about needs that were felt community-wide, but really it's kind of since grown, and we've tried to bring people together in such a way that we can talk about either technical challenges people face or more broadly ways that we can advocate for and of course develop new methods of male contraception. So today what we have for you is a presentation from Lubrizol Life Science Health from Nick DeFranco, and it's overcoming challenges in formulation development. One of the reasons we thought this was important is so often when people think of contraception, the general public, they think of a daily pill. And it's rare that we think that we see people thinking about things other than oral delivery. And so one of the things that we wanted to really bring to light is, some of the challenges and also opportunities in the development and manufacturing of long-acting products. And so Nick, who coordinates a multidisciplinary team at Lubrizol, they work with excipients, development, manufacturing services for long-acting injectables and implantables. And he also works on the development and manufacturing of injections, implants, and other drug products. So I'm going to kick it over to Nick, who's going to talk about challenges in formulation development, and then we can have a short Q&A at the end of the session. So with that, Nick, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Logan. And thanks to MCI for the opportunity to speak today. I hope that this will be an interesting talk. I realize there are some people who are more familiar with long-acting dosage forms, others who are completely new to the field, and it's a broad field. So I did my best to try to boil down some of the common challenges that we see in our development projects and give people a good introduction to how these products are developed and what makes for a successful long-acting product. And so this is the overview of what we'll go through today. We'll start with a brief introduction to Lubrizol Life Science Health, the organization I work for, dive into what long-acting drug delivery is, trends that we see in the market, the key challenges that we face on a daily basis, helping clients in this space, and then end with some case studies that will put some context around what we've talked about and some Q&A, if any questions arise throughout the presentation. And so just to start, Lubrizol Life Science Health is part of the Lubrizol Corporation. We are a $7 billion specialty chemical company, part of the Berkshire Hathaway portfolio of companies. Our legacy business in the health space is traditionally as a polymer supplier. We've supplied medical polymers and excipients for decades now. But over the years, we've evolved. We've added on development, manufacturing capabilities, ability to handle and formulate drugs, to really expand from just a polymer supplier into a full service partner. So you may even recognize some of the names on this acquisition list as we've grown over time. And our legacy business in the pharma space is in our excipient materials. So our Carbapol, Novion, and Pemulin materials have been used as viscosity modifiers. They've been used in ophthalmic formulations, extended release oral tablets for decades now. And more recently, our thermoplastic polyurethanes, which have long been used in medical applications, have also found some purchase in the pharmaceutical space for intravaginal rings and subcutaneous implant types of projects as a controlled release excipient. We've also added over the years the ability to do drug product development, focusing primarily in complex drug products. So we'll focus most of our conversation today around long-acting dosage forms, but we also do sterile and aseptic manufacturing. And we spend a lot of time solving solubility and bioavailability challenges for clients using a number of different techniques that we won't have time to go through today, but definitely want to highlight. And then finally, as a manufacturing partner, we've supported clinical trial manufacturing for years now. In 2019, we did 59 GMP batches of products for US trials, European trials, really global presence. And recently, just this year, our commercial manufacturing facility underwent its first FDA inspection. And so we're happy to say now that we are a commercial manufacturing partner as well in the pharma space. So a lot of exciting changes here at Lubrizol. And so most of what we'll talk about today is work that we perform out of our CDMO division. It's located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. For those of you who are familiar with this site, you may know it as Particle Sciences. It was acquired back in 2015 and brought into the Lubrizol family so that we could add that development and manufacturing expertise to complement our offering in the pharma space. This is a 50,000 square foot facility, does everything from early stage development through commercial manufacturing, a lot of complex dosage forms, and we can work with highly potent compounds, DEA registered substances, and really do everything in-house from analytical method development, pre-formulation activities, all the way through release and stability testing for drug products. So because we have all these capabilities, we get to see a lot of different projects. We try to boil down our target product categories into the buckets that you see here. And I'd love to spend time talking about all of these, but today we'll focus primarily on drug-eluting devices and depots and their role in long-acting drug delivery. So with that intro and background in mind, we'll jump into what is long-acting drug delivery, how do we define it, and how do we address it at our organization. So a lot of people who come to us interested in long-acting drug delivery are trying to solve the challenge of poor patient compliance. With the growing prevalence of chronic diseases, both in the US and globally, aging populations, we're seeing increased prevalence of conditions such as diabetes, cancers, eye diseases, and these chronic conditions often come with poor patient compliance because you're asking a patient to take daily or weekly administrations of a drug for essentially the rest of their lives. It can be a daunting task for a patient. And so a lot of companies are turning to long-acting dosage forms as a way to reduce that administration frequency for patients, make it easier to administer these drugs. But in addition to chronic conditions, there are also treatment regimens that people elect to enter into, such as contraception, where you're committing to a long-term dosing of a drug, and that can also be quite the burden on a patient who is trying to stay adherent to their medication when they are being asked to do it on a daily basis, possibly at the same time every day. It becomes challenging, even if it's just a simple pill. And so there are a few different types of products that have been developed to address this. We like to put them into these three buckets. The first is implantable systems, which we define as intravaginal rings, such as NuvaRing, for example. These are often used for contraception, but more recently have expanded out into areas such as HIV prevention. Subcutaneous implants, like the rod-shaped implant you see here on the slide, can be implanted below the skin, often in the upper arm, to provide a long-acting release of a drug. And more recently, we've seen a lot of interest in ophthalmic or ocular implants to treat eye conditions. These are, think, size smaller than a grain of rice to go into the eye. So very different dimensions, but similar concepts to these other implants. The second bucket is depot injections. So these are injectable products, often based on the use of bioresorbable polymers in the form of microspheres. So you can encapsulate an API in a bioresorbable polymer like a PLGA, or possibly in a suspension of a polymer. When injected, these dosage forms form a solid depot in the body and degrade over time to release a drug. So there are many of these on the market today, used to deliver a pretty wide range of APIs. And then the third bucket is kind of the other miscellaneous bucket, products that don't really fit nicely into our first two categories here. There are long-acting oral dosage forms. People are trying to improve upon oral delivery to get weekly or monthly dosing from a single pill. And there are combination products that are based on existing medical devices. So if you think about the increased focus on biosensing and devices that are implanted into the body for long durations or even life of patient, oftentimes these will induce foreign body response, causing inflammation that can affect the performance of a device. They may pose an infection risk. And so introducing drugs to these systems can help improve their performance or patient safety during administration. And so, as you can see here, there's a really broad range of products, and they're all very different in their forms. But the key link between all three of these buckets is that these products use polymers, polymer systems, to provide controlled or targeted delivery of drugs. And that common thread is what really ties it together and also gives these products similar challenges in development and manufacturing. And we've had the privilege of getting to work in all three of these areas over the years, 25 plus implantable systems, many of which are intravaginal rings, where a lot of our work in this space started 20 years ago. Since then, we've expanded into particle-based systems like depot injections, and even brought in some medical device clients who are interested in adding drugs to their products. And these are some of the trends that we're seeing in the long-acting space. The growth in R&D funding has been significant in recent years, especially grant funding and R&D partnerships, as I mentioned, mainly to address patient compliance, but also to improve drug delivery in low and middle income countries where accessing healthcare can be difficult, and staying adherent to a medication becomes an even more complex subject. Developing long-acting dosage forms can ensure that someone who may not be able to access a healthcare provider on a regular basis can still receive their medication over an extended time frame. We've seen growth in companies interested in the 505(b)(2) regulatory pathway, companies who come to us with existing APIs, looking for improved formulations or different dosage forms, and also companies interested in lifecycle management for their products, trying to improve upon their innovator product and leverage the data they've already generated to get those products approved. And then finally, the regulatory bodies in the US and globally are interested in encouraging generic development, especially for complex products, many of which are long-acting injectables. And so we've seen research funding go towards characterizing these products and helping to lower the barrier for companies to enter into this space. And it's trickled down to us as a development and manufacturing provider. And so with all these trends and interest in long-acting development and manufacturing, we often end up educating our clients on what some of the challenges are in these spaces. And we break it down into development, the manufacturing, and the characterization of these products. And within each of these spaces, there's a lot to take in, a lot to consider. And so we'll touch upon each of these things. It's difficult to go into detail because there's so much to consider, but I'll try to take you through a high-level overview. This is how the process goes with long-acting drug products. But to start, when clients come to us, they often come with their own goals, therapeutic goals, and qualitative goals in mind. The things that you see on the left side of the slide here. They may be looking to reformulate a product to go down that 505(b)(2) pathway, improve the stability of a formulation that they've developed on benchtop, or even just scale up something that they have some proof of concept data on. Our goal as a CDMO, a contract development and manufacturing organization, is to take these qualitative inputs, work with our clients to develop a target product profile, or a TPP, which spits out quantitative targets for our team to go after. Understanding what the API is, how much of it needs to be in a product, what the intended duration of that product is, are all the targets that our team works on in development and manufacturing. And most importantly, what we are trying to control is API release. And for long-acting dosage forms, this is the most critical aspect, to be able to control release over the intended duration within the therapeutic window that our clients are targeting. And so when we talk about the development phase of a project, a lot of our efforts are centered around doing just that, controlling drug release. So one of the first considerations that we run into is what's going to be the design of the device. And we're going to focus primarily on implantable systems in this presentation, but a lot of these considerations can apply to injectables or even some of the novel oral or combination products I talked about earlier. But within implantables, there are primarily two types of designs that we work with. The first is core sheath reservoir implants. These are systems that consist of a drug-loaded core surrounded by a rate-controlling polymer membrane. These can take the form of a rod or a ring shape. And the goal here of including that rate-controlling membrane is to achieve better control over drug release. These systems are able to achieve zero order or close to zero order release, which is shown in the red line on this graph. And that means you're achieving steady release over time, consistent drug release rate. This can be very important when you think about dosing something like a sex hormone, for example, where precise levels of the drug are needed over time. And fluctuations, a burst release can have negative impacts for the patient, affect the treatment. In cases where a drug has, say, a wider therapeutic window or a burst release may even be desired in the initial, right after administration of a product, we also work on matrix implants. These are products that consist of a drug and a polymer homogeneously mixed together, and they exhibit what's known as first order release, which is a fast drug release rate that tapers off over time. And while it is a simpler design, you get slightly less control over release. And so depending on the API you're working with, your therapeutic goals, you may consider choosing one or the other option in development. And so once you've settled on, here's a design that I want to work with, dimensions come into play. Obviously, where the implant is going to play a big role here. It's going in the eye. The dimensional considerations are completely different than a subcutaneous implant that goes in under the skin in the upper arm. But as you actually change the, say, diameter of a rod-shaped implant, you're also changing the surface area through which drug can diffuse and creating an impact on drug release by doing so. So it's important to evaluate this and settle on a dimensional specification early on in a project. And when you're designing core sheath systems, the dimensions of the overall device aren't the only factor you have to keep in mind. When you have a sheath around a drug-loaded core, the thickness of that sheath has a significant impact on drug release. If you think about a very thick sheath, in this case, 100 microns, shown with the blue squares on the slide, what you see is thicker sheath gets you closer to that zero order or steady state release over time. But as the sheath gets thinner, you get closer to resembling a matrix type implant, where the drug and polymer are homogeneously dispersed through the whole device, and therefore you get closer, or you get more and more of a first order release rate with a higher burst initially. And then finally, drug loading plays obviously a major role here. Your loading is going to be dictated by both the intended duration and overall dose of the product. You have to make sure there's enough API in the device to last for the duration that you intend to treat your patients, and that you're not exhausting the API. But also, understanding how drug loading affects release can be a bit of a complex subject. We can get into a conversation on solubility of drugs and polymers, but just to simplify the conversation for today, let's just take a look at these two different loading levels. One shown with the blue squares on the slide is drug loading at the solubility limit of the polymer, and the blue circles are 25 times that loading. And the takeaway here is you see there's 25 times the loading, but the results that we see in vitro drug release is not 25 times higher. It's not a linear relationship. The release rate doesn't scale linearly with drug loading. So this is something that we can change to affect drug release, but the impact is going to vary depending on how the drug and polymer are interacting. And so we've talked a lot about polymers and how the design impacts the device, but when it comes to selecting the polymers, understanding the interactions with the API and chemical considerations is not all that you need to take into account. When it comes to sourcing polymers for drug products, finding the right suppliers is important. You will find that even for the same chemistries, there's vendor-to-vendor variability due to different specifications or manufacturing techniques. And there may even be batch-to-batch variability from a single supplier. This is something I have an example of later in the presentation, and how it can impact performance of a drug product. But in addition to this, a good excipient supplier will go beyond just providing consistent product. They'll also provide product that complies with pharmaceutical standards, ideally GMP excipient grade material. You may have seen recently the FDA is putting increased focus on the materials that go into drug products, creating pathways by which to review excipients as standalone components of drug products. And so it's important to work with suppliers who understand the needs of pharmaceuticals and are manufacturing materials to the appropriate quality standards. And a good excipient supplier will also include supporting data on their material in the form of excipient information packages, which can provide valuable data on different grades of the polymer and be used to help guide development work. Drug master files, which are filed with regulatory bodies, contain detailed CMC information on the excipient, allowing the regulatory agency to access that information during reviews of filings and help support the drug product filing itself. And then, of course, biocompatibility testing, which is basically a given in this space. And so when we look at what your polymer options are in pharmaceuticals, there are two broad families. There's bioresorbable polymers, which are shown on the left side here. These polymers degrade within the body, often through hydrolysis, most common example of which is PLGA, polylactic coglycolic acid. These polymers are a great option for implantable or injected systems because they do not require explantation at the end of treatment. Because these polymers degrade away, the drug diffuses out of the system. At the end of treatment, ideally nothing is left behind, and there's no need for a second surgery to remove something from the patient. However, in cases where you want to extend release to longer timeframes, say a year or more, or treatment needs to be reversible, you need to have the option to remove an implant and stop treatment, biodurable polymers, which are shown on the right side, are a good option as well. These are the types of polymers that are used in systems like intravaginal rings, for example. They do not degrade within the body, and they are often used in core sheath or co-extruded combinations like the reservoir systems we talked about earlier. And while there are a lot of polymer options out there, only a select number of these are used in approved products. And there are limited number of suppliers who are really capable of supplying pharmaceutical grade materials. So it's important to keep those things in mind even when you selected a polymer and are looking for a supplier. And to dive into the polymer selection a bit more, I'd like to pull out one of those examples in the biodurable section, thermoplastic polyurethane, or TPU. This is a material that Lubrizol actually synthesizes and supplies into the pharmaceutical space. It's a biodurable polymer. It's found most use in intravaginal rings. There are companies evaluating it for other implantable applications as well. And we have done a lot of the background work on the documentation side, setting up drug master files for these polymers, establishing GMP manufacturing at our plant to produce these polymers. And so we're checking the boxes from an excipient standpoint. But the reason these are interesting polymers for drug delivery actually stems from their chemistry. So thermoplastic polyurethanes are block copolymers, consist of a hard segment, which is an isocyanate and a chain extender. This provides the crystalline structure of a polymer, hardness, and then a soft block segment, which consists of an isocyanate and a polyol. This contributes to the elasticity and flexibility that TPUs are known for. I won't dive into a deep chemistry lesson here, but essentially by changing the ratios of hard and soft segment and the components that go into those segments, we can produce a very wide range of physical and chemical properties from these polymers. And so when you look at other biodegradable polymers that are used commonly in pharmaceuticals, such as silicone and ethylene vinyl acetate, we see that TPU does have some benefits here. Silicone is a material that's been used for decades now. It's a proven material in the drug delivery space. But when it comes to changing the properties of a silicone, you really only have one knob or lever to pull, turn. It's the cross-link density of the polymer. And so, you only can do so much from a polymer chemistry standpoint to change the performance of your product. Ethylene vinyl acetate, another proven material in the pharmaceutical space, has been used in several intravaginal ring projects and implants. But again, with ethylene vinyl acetate, by changing vinyl acetate content, you can change crystallinity and polarity, but not independently of one another. And so, there is still limitations in how much customization you can do. We like to say that TPU provides the most flexibility or versatility by changing chemical physical cross-link density, crystallinity, and polarity independently of one another. We can create a very wide range of materials with different properties and get better control over drug loading and release. And so this really shows how deep the considerations can go in selecting a polymer for the right application. We work with silicone, EVA, and TPU on a regular basis at our CDMO facility. And depending on the application, each has its pros and cons. But we like to think that the TPU provides a lot of benefits in this space and encourage people to at least evaluate it during their projects as an option for implantable systems. And so, looking at how that impact of polymer selection actually affects the drug product itself, we have a case study here. It shows some work we did looking at how did our different pathway TPUs produce different drug release rates. So we did some in vitro testing using the diffusion cell setup with a donor chamber and an acceptor chamber of drug, same dimensions of the implants, the same drug loading. All we did was change the polymer selection. And the three polymers that we selected had different durometers, different hardnesses. One of them had a water pickup, so it actually absorbed water in the body. And as you can see here, we achieved three wildly different drug release rates with the same API. And so what this really goes to show is that just by changing polymer selection, you can have a significant impact on drug release. And if you think about tuning the release of a product, it's possible that by changing those ratios or those chemistries, you can fill in this white space and hit targets that are in between these three curves. And so, understanding the different levers you can pull on the chemistry is important, but of course, the way that the polymers interact with the API is also very important in designing these systems. And when you think about core sheath implants, solubility in the core polymer versus the sheath polymer can have a major impact on how quickly the drug leaves that system. In an implant where the sheath polymer, the API is not very soluble in the sheath polymer, you achieve a much slower release rate, closer to zero order. But of course, if you're selecting polymers and prototyping with polymers that have a higher solubility, or API has a higher solubility in the polymer, you're going to get faster release, closer to first order. So just another factor to keep in mind when designing these systems. And then the last consideration I'll talk about in development is with regards to bioresorbable polymers. I mentioned earlier that PLGA is one of the more common polymers in this space. This is a copolymer of polyglycolic acid and polylactic acid. If you look at polyglycolic acid, this is a polymer that degrades relatively quickly. Within 10 weeks, it loses most of its strength, whereas polylactic acid lasts much longer, degrades at a much slower rate. And again, similar to a TPU, by changing the ratios of these components, the lactic acid component and the glycolic acid component, as well as the molecular weight of the PLGAs, you can achieve different degradation rates in the body. And so just another way to customize these materials using polymer selection. And so, I mean, hopefully you see that numerous different considerations that go into just the development of these products. We spend a lot of time in the design and development phase developing not only robust products, but also robust processes to make those products. And that leads us into more successful scale-up activities and manufacturing when we go to take clients from prototyping into engineering batches and clinical trial material. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we actually make these prototypes and eventually GMP materials at our facility. So the first step in this process is how do you incorporate the API into your polymer? And there are a few different techniques to do this, but most commonly we use twin screw hot melt extrusion to achieve this. This is a process that uses an extruder with two screws in which the API and the polymer are fed into the barrel of this device, and through the application of heat and shear, they are mixed together to form a homogeneous dispersion, gives you a compound that is your polymer loaded with your drug, essentially. It's a simplified version of it, but I think it helps get the point across. Once you have that drug-loaded polymer, you can then put it back through a second extrusion process, at the end of which you have a die that forms your device into whatever form factor you're trying to achieve. This could be a rod, it could be a tube, a film. You have a lot of customization with the shape of your final device. You can also put your material into a mold, a heated mold, using an injection molding process. It allows you to develop more complex form factors by developing a mold in the shape of your desired final product. And so we utilize both these techniques at our CDMO site. There are pros and cons to both, but most of the time we are using extrusion due to its continuous processing and ability to make large batches of product for our clients. And we've talked a lot about core sheath systems. We actually utilize extrusion to develop these systems as well. The process that you see here on this slide is known as Coextrusion, wherein we actually take two extruders, combine them at a crosshead die to produce the core sheath formulations that I've been talking about in the presentation. So you see here, one extruder is feeding the core, which contains the drug, shown in orange. A second extruder is feeding the drug-free polymer around the outside to form that continuous filament with the sheath around it. This requires understanding of process parameters to ensure that these materials adhere to one another, that they are flowing at the proper rates to create a sheath at the right thickness. It's a complex process, and it's one that can get even more complex by adding a second sheath to a device. This is not something we commonly do, but could be performed to add a protective layer around the device, or in cases where two APIs are not compatible and need to be in separate layers. It's not, as I mentioned, not super common, but really just goes to show how complex these processes can get, but also the kinds of unique designs that you can achieve if you understand extrusion and how to process polymers. And so one of the challenges that we face often as an early stage partner for clients is how do you manufacture when you have limited material? People who are working in discovery, especially, will often have small quantities of API to work with, or valuable API that we try not to waste during development. And so in these cases, we have some techniques to try to work in smaller batch sizes. Oftentimes, when we receive polymers in pellet form, we will cryomill them to form a powder, mix that with the API using standard mixing tools like a turbulent mixer, and then run them through equipment that's designed for smaller batch sizes. Mini twin screw extruders, small molding equipment, the things that allow us to prototype quickly and with limited materials when possible. But of course, polymer selection, while important, is not everything. Manufacturing technique also has a major role on the drug product. It's important that the process for making these products, when you're applying high heat and shear, you can affect not only the polymer, but also the API in your product. It's important that processes are optimized so that you don't degrade a polymer or degrade an API, and ultimately affect the performance of the final device. And so that goes back to a lot of the work that goes into the development phase of a project. Before we go to scale up any project, we spend a significant amount of time trying to optimize the production of these implants, make sure that we have a robust process in R&D that we can then scale up. And the same goes for technology transfers. A lot of companies who come to us are working on small batch sizes, benchtop processes, and are looking for someone to help them scale a process, bring it into GMP. One of our core competencies is really being able to take those processes, optimize them, and bring them into the scales that are needed for clinical and commercial production, bringing in the quality considerations, the engineering support that's needed to really do this in a clean room environment. And so I don't want to leave out depot injections. I know I said earlier how I'd focus on implants, but depot injections are another area of interest in long-acting development, and a lot of the considerations apply. Polymer selection, drug loading levels, making sure that your system degrades at desired rate. But they also bring unique considerations. If you think about developing microspheres, particle size distribution, preventing agglomeration of those particles are some of the specific considerations that come into play for these products. The manufacturing process for these depot injections is also different, often relying on homogenization and solvent evaporation processes that require residual solvent handling capabilities and understanding how to dispose of those solvents, things that may not play a major role in small batch sizes on a benchtop, but when you go to scale, becomes a major part of the project in designing your process. And so we won't be able to get too much into it, but after today's presentation, I'll hopefully be able to share some resources where we dive into that in a little bit more detail. And then the last consideration that, again, we won't talk too much about today is sterility. This is something that we evaluate early on in just about every project. For injected products like these depot injections or implanted products, the sterility requirement is an important one to evaluate even in early stages of a project. Understanding if your product is amenable to E-beam or gamma irradiation can play a major role in how you then go to scale and produce your final sterile product. And if your product or your API, your polymer are not amenable to terminal sterilization, aseptic manufacturing brings its own set of complexities and challenges, ones that we've addressed as a CDMO in the past, but it's important to know early on that that's going to be part of a project to ensure that your process, the way you make product or assemble it, can be converted into an aseptic process in a clean room. And so the last area that we'll spend time on today is the characterization of these products. So once you have a development prototype or a clinical batch to release, characterizing your product is very important. And where we'll focus mostly is in drug release testing. This is something that we obviously do quite often at our CDMO site, developing and validating methods using everything from orbital shaker ovens and incubators through USP apparatus 4 and apparatus 7 systems to be able to characterize drug release from these complex devices. And the keys here are that these tests need to be representative of the environment that these implants or injections are going into. They need to be sensitive enough to detect changes in prototypes. So it's important to challenge your in vitro release testing to make sure that you're able to detect deviations in product quality. And they must be reproducible. We spend a lot of time developing methods for clients, but also then validating them to support clinical batch and commercial batch releases later on in projects. And so, in vitro release testing, it's a valuable tool to perform that batch release, but is also used in earlier stages of projects to help us assess changes in the design. If we tweak a sheath thickness, change drug loading, to be able to see how that impacts the formulation helps guide us in our DOEs and our experiments for clients. It helps us be more efficient in the way we develop next rounds of prototypes. But a key here, and something that we encourage clients to keep in mind, is that in vitro release testing, while an incredibly useful tool for guiding formulation, releasing material, ensuring you have consistent product, is not necessarily a tool for predicting in vivo performance. In vitro, in vivo correlations are possible, but we encourage clients to get their materials in vivo as quickly as possible, because that is the most proven, most effective way to see if your product is performing to the way that you intend it to. And so just a few more slides here for me. We'll go into a couple of case studies that will show some of the work that we've done in CDMO and hopefully provide some real life context to the considerations we've been discussing. The first is a case from several years ago where a manufacturing change by an excipient supplier actually impacted a client's drug product. So this was a project where we were developing an intravaginal ring for a client. The vendor of the polymer actually changed their solvent and initiator in their manufacturing process. And so, we were alerted to this change. Specifications on the polymer were, really not changed significantly from the old product. And this was a supplier who had supplied excipient grade, pharmaceutical grade material for many years. So we weren't expecting any significant change in the drug product. But what we found was the next batch of intravaginal rings, there was a color change in the final product. We saw yellowing in the rings, and we saw an increase in related substances for one of the APIs in the device, showing that some sort of degradation going on in the processing of these rings. And so this shows some of those results, some of the discoloration bolded in this table, as well as that increase in related substances. And so we tried to investigate this, and we took a look at the supplier specifications for the polymer, the old material in batch A and the new material in batch B. Here's the new solvent and initiator in the process. Specifications weren't significantly different, but what we found was that right at the bottom here in green, there was a wide range in the specification for antioxidant in the polymer. From 2 to 100 parts per million was considered within spec, acceptable. In the past, we had received material that was right in the middle of that specification. The batch that we had received, we were exhibiting yellowing, happened to be on the low end. And so we did some further work investigating this issue, and eventually ended up settling on this as the cause of the challenges we were facing, and actually setting a minimum antioxidant level in the polymer to ensure that we could get consistent drug product on the other end. And so this just goes to show, all those little considerations that I walked us through earlier, they can have a major impact on the performance of a device. And it also shows the importance of working with someone who understands the requirements of pharmaceutical drug products. There's someone who will work with you to understand what's gone wrong, and possibly set custom specifications when needed to ensure that you're able to get a consistent and performing drug product. And so just a few more case studies in some of the work that we've done over the years in this implantable space. The first of which is a non-infringing generic vaginal ring that we helped develop many years ago. This is a product that is now sold today in Europe. It utilizes thermoplastic polyurethane and EVA. We assisted on the development of this product, scale up, and then eventually transferred the manufacturing process back to the client for commercial supply. And so we got to do a lot of work trying to optimize that design and find ways to develop a product that performed similarly to an innovator, but with a different design. We also have worked on several bioresorbable projects, one of which is a subcutaneous implant, very similar to the one you see here in the image. This was a project where we actually transferred in a manufacturing process to support a client going into a phase 2A clinical trial. This is something that we do quite often at our facility. While we love helping clients from very early stage of projects and getting to be a partner with them throughout the lifetime and the journey of their project, oftentimes clients come to us having done some work on a benchtop, or even having developed some pilot scale batches of a product and looking for someone who can help them scale or get into clinical trials. And so, it's a unique role that we get to play where we can enter or exit a project really at any stage. And in this case, it was a process that was developed that we got to optimize and produce material for clinical trials. We've also done some novel product development as well. So this is an example of an intravaginal ring using a novel design that we developed at our Bethlehem facility, utilizing thermoplastic polyurethanes to control the release of drug from an IVR that has a much higher loading than a traditional intravaginal ring. And so the release data on the right side shows our ability to control the release kinetics from this device in different prototypes. We've actually worked with some clients utilizing this novel technology. It's something that we file patents on and are actually now gearing up to take out for partnerships. And so there's still room, despite the fact that these products have been on the market for decades now, there's still room to innovate. And we have a great team at our Bethlehem site that is working on novel ways to develop these products. Speaking of which, the last case study I have is one of my favorite examples from LongActing, not just because it uses Lubrizol materials, but because I think it's a very unique product and a unique approach to solving a really complex challenge. So this was a client that we worked with who was looking to deliver two different drugs, two different APIs from a single intravaginal ring. One of which was levonorgestrel for contraceptive purposes. The other was tenofovir for HIV prevention. And so these are two very different drugs with different properties. And to get them both into a single device and then releasing at the desired rate is a challenge that required, I think, a unique way of approaching this design. So this product actually consists of two components. What you see in the bottom 3/4, the white portion of the ring, is actually a pathway thermoplastic polyurethane tube that's loaded with tenofovir paste. And this was the way to incorporate tenofovir to get it to release at the desired rate. It's essentially a core sheath system that utilized a very unique way of incorporating the drug into the tube. And the pathway TPU was selected to control that release rate to the desired level for tenofovir. The levonorgestrel component along the top of the ring is actually a co-extruded core sheath system of 2 TPUs. So the levonorgestrel loaded into the core TPU, co-extruded with a sheath of a second thermoplastic polyurethane that was optimized to achieve the desired release rate for the levonorgestrel. So tenofovir, which was releasing, I believe, at a third of the rate of the levonorgestrel, we were able to achieve the targets for both of these at 90+ days in vitro, despite the huge differences in API properties and from a single device on top of it all. And so this was a project where we helped in the development phase, perform clinical trial manufacturing for phase 1, and this is a project that's also being scaled now to go into further clinical trials and evaluation. And so these are interesting examples, I feel, of how we can achieve long-acting dosage forms, but these are examples of products that have been on the market for years now: vaginal rings, subcutaneous implants. What we're seeing, I think, is a really bright future in long-acting. Being a CDMO, I think we get the privilege of being at cutting edge of what is under development and what the next generation of drug delivery looks like. And so we're seeing a lot more interest in ocular implant technologies and people who are trying to treat eye diseases with novel devices. I touched upon innovative intravaginal ring designs, people who are looking at different materials, but not only different materials, but different ways of designing these systems to get more drug in and control the release. Long-acting oral dosage forms that can last a week or more, from a simple oral pill, as well as novel injectable platforms that enable long-acting delivery and may even in the future enable delivery of large molecules or biologics. So there are a lot of frontiers still to explore in long-acting, and I think we are lucky here at Lubrizol to get to support clients in this space. So I'll leave you with this slide, just a summary of what we do. We truly are an end-to-end partner. We work on a variety of different dosage forms, as you can see here on the right side of the slide. We talked a lot about long-acting products. This is an area where we've supported a lot of clients to bridge the gap between development and clinical supply, helping them optimize and scale products. But I also just want to touch upon the work we do in aseptic and sterile manufacturing. We pride ourselves on having a facility that is flexible, so clean room space that can accommodate different formulation approaches, and sterile filling for vials, bottles, syringes that doesn't have minimum batch sizes. We can design custom project plans and again help clients make the leap from development to clinical and then clinical to commercial in our commercial facility. And so, if you're looking for a partner who will be polymer technology agnostic, give you shots on goal, and be able to support you from concept to commercialization, I'd encourage you to reach out to me or anyone at Lubrizol. We look forward to working with more clients, both in long-acting and other areas of complex drug delivery. And hopefully we have a few minutes here for questions now. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think we do have a few minutes for questions. If anybody's got anything, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, or you can throw it in the chat and I'm happy to ask it for you. As moderator, I'll take the privilege to ask you one question I've got, which is, at what point should developers start considering delivery modes, and how early in the process is it to start considering like compatibility of APIs with implants or very specific technologies?
Sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned, sometimes clients come to us, they know exactly what they want to develop. They've already done prototyping. They're just looking for someone to scale it, right? But oftentimes, we actually get clients who have an API and say, I want a long-acting dosage form. What are my options? What can I do? And so we may even look at different approaches, including implants and injectables in parallel in a early stage feasibility program. We find that some of these quick prototyping projects where we bring in API, we quickly generate prototypes and characterize, have made it a lot easier of a decision then for clients who can see some data on here's how an implant may perform, here's how the microspheres perform, and then make a decision on which path to go down for their future development. And oftentimes in some of that feasibility work, we are doing compatibility testing with a few different polymers, just simple pre-formulation activities to make sure before we go into making a final product and then going through analytical testing that we have something that's going to work. And so, the feasibility programs are a good way of doing that quickly.
Excellent, thanks. I see a question from Jeff in the chat asking if you've worked on any male contraceptive products.
So we'd love to. We are pursuing. So this is where I think our breadth of capabilities comes into play. Traditionally, we've been considered a good partner in female contraceptive products because we have such a long history there. We worked in some of the early vaginal rings. We've developed even a lot of the analytical methods for them. But we do a lot more than just intravaginal rings. We have these clean rooms with ISO 5 spaces and a team that understands aseptic manufacturing, right? So we can do filling of suspensions and solutions, emulsions in that facility. We have the FDA inspection. There's a lot more that we can do. It's just a matter of getting the word out, teaching people what we do, and bringing in those projects. So really the best way to see if we're the right partner is to reach out and ask, can you do this for me? Because even I can't touch upon everything that we work on in an hour-long presentation. So I'd encourage anyone who, after this presentation, maybe to search through our website. We have a great blog where we talk a lot about the work that we do and the types of products that we work on that I think a lot of people here will find quite interesting.
Excellent. And then I have another question, if there's nothing else from the group, is that, I think there's a lot of parallels between contraception as a field and then drug delivery more broadly, that, there's often a lot of reliance on variations on a theme. Innovation is coming down the pipeline, but some tried and true methods have been relied on for a really long time. Right. And so with that said, seeing things coming down the pipe and seeing innovation on the horizon, where do you think drug delivery is headed in the next, say, 5 or 10 years, especially as it relates to contraception?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see people who look to change that dosage form, right? Who try to move away from the traditional products that have been on the market today. I think some of the work that's going on in long-acting oral products is really innovative and can have a huge impact in areas like contraception, but also just chronic conditions in general. I also think an area that we're seeing more interest in that's going to be interesting in coming years is multi-API systems. The people who are looking at combinations of APIs that haven't been explored in the past and that can leverage some of the existing safety and efficacy data. Those are areas that require a lot more work up front to understand compatibility and control drug release, but it's something that I think is quite interesting. And then obviously biologics are growing and are already a huge part of pharmaceutical space. There is a next generation of biologics coming, right? And so it's going to take time. It's a slow evolution, but I think looking towards long-acting delivery of biologics, there are a couple companies and research labs who are pursuing this today. And I think the impact that those technologies could have would be tremendous, making those easier to administer, removing the hospital visits from the equation, and ultimately making the patient experience much better.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I see we're running out of time. I wanted to thank also everyone for coming today. Please stay tuned to our social media. You can go to our website, malecontraceptive.org, and sign up for our newsletter where we'll announce future Lemonade stands. But Nick, thanks so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.